is Radio Bath.
And we are on the second hour of Brave Business Conversation. In the studio we have today Terry Ann Baxter and Greg Harris from Individual Chartered Financial Planners. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Back again.
You people again.
Yes, third time lucky, yeah.
Yeah, they are patrons of Radio Bath, and we are going to talk about business exit today. Why the topic? Why is this an important topic to talk about?
It's probably one of the most common things we're now getting inquiries about, I would say. I think for a lot of business owners, regardless whether your industry's coped really, really well or has struggled under lockdown and COVID, it's been something that's given business owners an opportunity to take stock really of what their plans are, why they're running a business, why are you going through all those stresses and those painful barriers. And it's really given us the opportunity to sit down with a lot of them and have those conversations.
It's actually our business exit planning page on our website is the most visited page on the whole of our website. So we sat down and we thought, you know what, maybe there's a lot more resource we could provide people, because we provide a lot of free information up front. So we've done put a guide up this week. We thought we'd come on and speak to you about it and just try to raise a bit of awareness about some of the things that people could be thinking about.
Fantastic. We'll talk more about that guide. What's new in Individual? Any updates that we should know about?
We've had some nice
there is
weather,
actually.
That's the start.
We've recently had our new intake of placement students start.
Nice.
So we've got 4 placement students that have started with us, and they're settling in and enjoying things. So we've done that.
And if any of them are listening, you're doing really well, so keep up the hard work.
I will be back to the office later.
Ooh, ouch. Relax, you've got another 54 minutes before they're back. I'll try to keep them here longer. Right. We'll be back with more of Individual's business exit planning strategies after this. I'll be watching you. That's our message to the interns in the office.
I actually didn't realise that until you said it. Have you been thinking that up the whole time?
No, I just figured that out. It's like, should I announce the name of the song or just that final strong message to those new students in the office?
Like absolute dragons now, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, the station's just down the road, guys. Anyway. Well, you mentioned a bit about Business Exit Guide. Tell us more about that.
I think no one wants to plan for the end. And when you're running a business, it's a bit like planning for retirement. You're in the midst of everything, you're enjoying it, you're loving it. No one really wants to sit down and think, at what point is this going to end? And I think just like retirement planning, things are changing in society. And when you retire or when you sell a business, it doesn't mean it's the end. Lots of people are going on to do other ventures or other things that they want to do in life. So I think it's quite important that we talk about that element, that just because something might be finishing, or it might not even be finishing, it might be that you're passing it on to somebody else. It doesn't mean that it's the end of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
You catch a business owner on a good day and they're never going to retire, but you catch them on a bad day and they wish they could retire 5 years ago. So it's one of those things where sometimes, like Sharon said, business owners don't typically want to think about the end, because when it is going well and when you're having those good days, it can seem like nothing wants to really ever end.
But then again, you don't always have to sell a business when it's in a bad situation.
No.
Sometimes you want to sell it when it's on the up.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
often that's the best time to sell a
Exactly.
business, isn't
Yeah.
it, really? So
And I think it's knowing what that sweet spot is of at what point is good to sell. And I think the mistake happens where you're bumbling along, doing really well, servicing your clients, and then an offer comes in and you think, oh God, I wasn't even planning for that. What does that mean? And you can get tempted by that offer. But then by having a plan in place of when you're thinking of changing things and restructuring things, you can make sure that you can actually plan for that in advance. And it can take, 5 years from start to finish to build up the idea of wanting to think to start about coming out of the business and exiting before you actually go ahead and do it. Because you want to build up the value of the business and make sure that you get your money's worth from what you've invested.
Yeah. Build up the value of the business. Also put a strategic plan in place that you have successors in place. Groom
That's
up the
it.
successors. That's why it takes so long. Yeah.
And who are those successors? Are they family? Or are they people within the business, and how are you going to restructure that and make sure that you can involve all the parties involved in your, or maybe a couple of your exit?
Exactly.
That touches on a really important point about businesses as a whole, though, because there's a stat out there at the moment that shows that 52% of UK small businesses think that they would cease trading after 1 year if they lost a key person. Now, a key person doesn't necessarily mean a shareholder or director. That could be someone that has a very, very specific role in the business that's actually quite difficult to replace, or has a lot of customers and those kind of things. So it all, can you sort of see how it all sort of ties in together, the immediate planning, but actually that then ties into the longer term planning as well.
Exactly. Well, I just want to clarify. I don't see business exit as a sad thing. I think a lot of people figure that the business is me or the business is my baby. I just encourage them to look at their child and say, that is your baby. Okay, the business is the business.
Yeah.
Okay, your child is your baby, but maybe your pet, maybe, but not your business. And when you see your business as your identity or as your baby, sometimes exiting a business sounds like such a sad thing. But in my experience, lots of the clients that I serve, when we exit the business, especially if we sell it at a really good price, that's a celebration. That is actually, a lot of people want to be at that point where they start a business so that they can sell it, so that is a big celebration. But tell us more about this business exit guide. What's in it? How does it help people?
It gives some broken down points in and around the different ways that you can exit a business. So that might be through sale and acquisition. It might be through a management buyout. So there's different ways that you can come out of a business. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you're no longer a shareholder. You might want to maintain some of your shareholdership. So it goes through that. It also talks about the link with retirement, because sometimes people do exit a business because they want to go on to retire. And there is that common phrase of, I don't need to pay into a pension because my business is my retirement pot. And it talks about the dangers of utilising just your business as an investment, as your only retirement pot, and how you can spread that risk.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what's the danger of saying that my business is my retirement pot?
Well, often things change, and one of the sections in the guide is, trying to plan for what we call the unclear. It's not the unknown, because we know roughly where the business is heading, but it's not exactly crystal clear very often for a lot of businesses. So you've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to change for your own personal circumstances, health and family and all those other circumstances that sit outside of the business, but that have a direct and intrinsic link to how well the business often performs and succeeds. Being able to be flexible in that is a really important part of what the guide goes through. Because when you do get to that point, we always joke about in the office, best case and worst case scenarios, and planning for somewhere in between those parameters, but having a plan for the best, which is obviously a very nice thing to plan for, but also then having that plan for the worst case scenario. And when you're talking about exiting a business in all the different ways that Sherry-Ann's just mentioned, those variations are so vast in their ability.
I think the issue arises when people link retirement with their business, when their business is a value and it's only worth what it is worth that day. Something like COVID could hit it and it could not be worth the same the next day. So if you are going to retire and you're dependent on the value of your business, it might not sell for what you need to retire on. So what we tend to look at is, what do you need to retire on, and what could, best case and worst case scenario, your business provide as part of that? And then how do we mitigate any risks of it not being worth that value by having additional retirement vehicles in place to spread that risk? And it doesn't necessarily just have to be a pension. There could be different ways of investing that would spread that risk. So what then happens is, when you retire, you exit your business, and that forms part of some of the income that you're going to draw upon. It might be instantly, or it might be over a period of time. And then you have your other retirement vehicles as well. Because let's not forget, when you sell if you sell your business or it's acquired, you may be required to work in that business for a period of years upon completion of that sale. If you do a management buyout, you might be required to do that as well, to provide a handover, essentially. So it's really important that business owners don't go down that one-track mind of, my house or my business are my retirement vehicles, because like property can actually, with a click of the fingers, be worth a different value for what it was the day before.
And even before you're getting to the point where you're talking about disposal, I think we have a conversation with a lot of business owners about, what is your business doing for you right now? Are you trying to build up a capital asset that you can then dispose of in all those different ways, or actually are we using the business at the moment to generate an income? And when we talk about income, I'm not just talking about PAYE dividends and all those bonuses and all that, everything like that. Actually, some of that income could technically be funding your retirement planning through directors' contributions into pensions, for instance. So it's really understanding where that crossover and that hybrid is between income and capital generation, and what stage the business is at from that purpose.
Do you find that business owners take money out of their business in one way or another regularly enough? Or do they kind of just wait until I'll take it in the end?
Yeah, I think when you're working in your business, you're so proud of what you're doing. And you touched upon a lovely thing earlier about it is your identity, and you get a rush getting up every morning and coming into work. So at the end of the year, when you're sitting around the room and you're saying, you know, we've had a good year, do we want to take some dividends? Often what happens is, let's not take dividends this year. We'll plough money back into the business. We'll recruit new staff. We'll train them up more. We'll provide, we'll put it back into technology, whatever it is. What that means is that will increase the value of the business. So later on down the line, hopefully I'll get rewarded. And it's a really fine balance between looking after yourself and looking after the business. And business owners are entrepreneurial. They care a lot about others and people in their business. And self-care is not always their strong point. So it's about strategy again. If you have a strategy and you're on task with the strategy and you're overperforming from your strategy, maybe that's a great way to rationalise taking some money out of the business and rewarding yourself for all your hard work. And that's all about having objectives in place for both the business and your personal lifestyle as well.
Interesting. Yeah, we have in our business something called a profit account.
Okay.
We have a discipline every week or every month. My partner manages it, so the exact calculations is beyond me. But what I have seen, though, we take the discipline of having a certain percentage of our bottom line every month to put into that profit account. So we will always pay ourselves first in dividends. For example, if you are making 20% or 15% bottom line, that means it only takes 85% of your money to keep the business flowing, right? So that 15% is idle. So, okay, there's always this backup plan, contingency plan. We always have to have cash. But if we can take 7% of that 15% out and then put it into a fenced up profit account that is not allowed to be used for anything else. Yeah. So if operations needs money, go find it somewhere else or not spend on it. Yeah. Well, we're not taking the whole 15% out. We're taking like just half of it, and that's for the owners. And that has enabled us to pay ourselves dividends more regularly rather than, it's like dividend is what's left over. It's not. It shouldn't be.
I really like that idea. I think that's a great concept because it sits well with a business owner that's in place and structured in that way. And I think what we have to remember, if we're on one hand saying you need to have other strategies beyond this exiting your business for your retirement, you have to have the disposable income to put money into a savings account to save for those things. So it all comes full circle. And I think that's why it's really important. We work with business, finance and family, and that's why it's important that everything runs in tandem. And my dad uses this great analogy of it's like a train track. You have to have your business and your personal finances running along together so that they can achieve your overall objective. And a lot of people tend to separate the two. And I think if you're running a business and you've got employees that you care about, you want to pay them a bonus, you want to give them the training, you want to take them out for trips. And that does come often at the expense of your own back pocket. And it's about balancing the two, because we all know in business that employees are not always loyal, and they will do what's right for them and leave and they'll forget all the good things that you've done for them. So it's about balance and making sure that as business owners we care about ourselves as much as we care about other people.
Yeah. You need to protect the people that create jobs as well, because some people are gifted with the ability to create jobs, and when they stop having money or they start getting desperate in their lives, their focus is not there yet. But if they are financially empowered to keep doing that because they've got their calculations in place and they pay for themselves as well, they can continue creating more and more jobs. That's how I rationalize things.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll be back with more business exit strategy talk with individual chartered financial planners after this. We are still with Brave Business Conversation, individual chartered financial planners in the house We got Carrie Ann Baxter. I know, I've always wanted to say that.
In the house.
Talking about business risk. Whoop, whoop. Anyway.
So excited.
We've got to make that a bit more fun, haven't we, really?
Yep. So we were talking about, so let's say I want to sell my business because I want to plan for my retirement. And I say, in 10, 15 years, I'm going to sell my business. This is how much I think it's going to be valued because I'm a fortune teller, obviously. But then a lot of times I don't think about what could go wrong, right, between now and 10 years from now. What are some of the ways people can do a better job at mitigating risk if they're not exactly ready to sell their business now?
It's a big process that we go through when we first sit down with businesses. So yes, all business owners love to talk about their exit strategies and what they want to achieve, and we talk them through that, and then what we try and do is we work backwards from that point. So again, using your example is what could potentially happen over that business cycle, or more multiple cycles in some businesses' cases, and what could pose a risk to the business. So we've already touched upon earlier key people in the business. Now, very often the directors or shareholders, if they're fully involved in the business, will be key people. But actually, what we try and do, it's almost like a family tree for the business, and is plot out every single member of staff all the way through, from your receptionist all the way up through to the directors and wider than that. And we go through every single person in the business, so it can take quite a long time sometimes, work out how long they've been there, what their earnings are, and actually how easy or difficult they would be to replace. Now, for small businesses, what we'll then do is we'll then tier people, often from tier 1, crucial, would need instant replacement or a huge cash injection into the business to keep the business afloat, all the way to tier 3, which again can seem a little bit demeaning, but this is obviously very high, very sort of confidential. But those that actually are easier to replace, recruitment might take a few weeks, a few months, but actually we could get people in to do their role fairly quickly and get them up to speed. And then tier 2 somewhere in between. And that is a really, really valuable exercise, because what we can then do is all the tier 1s, you put in place provision called key person cover, and what we do is we work out the value that that person either brings into the business and what would need to be injected if they were no longer around from a death or critical illness point of view. And then tier 2 is maybe somewhere in between, where they got a little bit of cash injection just so that they can either encourage someone with more money coming across from an employment benefit point of view, or actually replace them altogether. It's
a bit like contingency planning.
Yes.
And if something key happens in a business, like say for example in our business, a financial advisor cannot work for whatever reason, we have to raise awareness of that to the client, and then they can put in contingency plans. So yes, there are insurance products that can help with it, but also it's making, we're a bit like business mentors and coaches, it's making them aware, okay, yes, you'll get a payout for that, but what's going to happen with those clients? Who's going to look after them? If there's a death in the firm, no one really wants to be fighting over who's looking over what client. So having those discussions up front, and this is an exercise we've been through in our business, having those discussions up front means that you can make decisions with a rational head on, rather than a lot of emotion being in the works with someone passing away or being ill. There are other things that you need to think about as well. What happens if there's a fire and your factory burns down and all of your equipment is toasted and you can't use it? So all these things need to have a contingency plan in place. It's how far you go with that planning. Some big companies, I know one big bank in particular, it's been reported that they've even got a plan in place if there's an alien invasion.
All right.
I mean, that's
how do you plan for that?
How do you plan for that?
That's not in the guide, by the way, unfortunately.
So that, that's how far you go, but it's about spending a bit of time to make sure that those risks are accounted for and that you can deal with them. And a classic example of that is we had a contingency plan in place for what happens if there's no cars on the road, the markets crash, and it was a COVID type thing.
Yeah.
On the day that we knew COVID was going to have an impact, literally printed off the plan. I was irrational, worrying about everyone working from home, but I was like, fine, chill, it's all good. Let's look at the plan, follow it. We've got this cash in the bank, which is X amount months of pay for everyone. And we rolled the plan out, and it was that day that made me realise how important contingency planning is. And if you are nearing retirement and something like COVID happens, how are you going to cope with that so that it doesn't affect the value of your business when you come to sell it?
Well, can you cope with that? Because if your business value just drops, it just drops, right?
Your business value drops sometimes because of market conditions, but sometimes it drops as a result of those conditions. So if you've done your contingency planning properly, it should mean that you've still retained your clients, you've still put strategies in place to make sure that that thing that might affect your business is not going to have as much of an impact because you know exactly what you're going to do.
Right. So even if you sell that business, if you exit your business at that difficult period of time, you can also sell the fact that you've got a contingency plan and that buyer can take it forward.
Yes, yeah. And if you look at a lot of businesses that wanted to sell, say in 2020, some businesses would have had those contingency plans and therefore the value won't have dropped too much because they can say, we've retained all of our workforce, we've retained all of our clients, it hasn't affected us because we've got the technology in place to still function. The businesses that didn't do the contingency planning and didn't have the luxury or the support or the education to know about this wouldn't have done that. So when they then came to sell, the buyers would have gone, well, where are your staff? How are they working? Oh, well, we've had to furlough them. Okay, so that's going to affect the value of what this business is worth. And that's what contingency planning brings. And you're going to need specialists and support to help ask those really important questions before you can then even think about the answers that you need to provide.
Any tips for the buyers of the business? Just to twist it a little bit.
Nice.
I know this is so much of a buyer's market now,
you
know, and everybody's going to say, my company is worth X. What are the questions you can ask to kind of get the real value of the company?
Yeah, so client banks or customer banks are an interesting one because quite often that's what you're purchasing. You're purchasing the rights of a business to then go on and have that come into your company. And what's really important is looking at all of the nitty-gritty of the breakdown of those clients one by one. What is their age? What are they purchasing? Has the business cross-sold various services to those clients, which might open up opportunities? And it can be really easy to shove a client bank in front of a company and go, buy this. But you've got to really whittle down each person and say, what value do they provide beyond, or what value don't they provide? So if I look at financial service, for example, when people sell a financial services firm, they might have 500 clients that someone might purchase, but they might be 85 years old, and a lot of the work that would have been done for those clients has been done.
Right.
So at face value, you might say that's not worth anything, but then who are their children? Who's going to inherit their wealth? So it's about getting really to grips with what you're buying and the business owners and what they're selling.
I think another one that we sometimes look at is if that business works with either professional or service providing businesses, i.e. not their customers, looking at those businesses as well, because often, and I think a lot of businesses in Bath are the same, they'll cross-refer between businesses at the same level. So you very rarely get a really high-quality level business that will cross-refer its clients into, one of the lower-end service providers. If that business is constantly working with high-quality, high reputation, all those really important key points, if they're working with those kind of businesses, that probably means that actually at the core of that business, they've got really high sort of quality core ethos there.
Yeah.
They're not going to then put their clients in a situation where they're going to be working with someone else that doesn't work to those standards.
And then it's about working with good financial advisors, accountants and solicitors to make sure that what you're purchasing is going to be good for you, that once you've signed on the dotted line and you own that new business, that there's going to be no massive complaint that comes out the woodwork that actually affects everything. So it's about doing the due diligence, and some businesses are larger and can afford a certain level of accountancy firm and solicitors. Some are smaller, and it's about finding a firm that's local, that knows the area in the market, that can provide you with a really good value piece of advice, because some firms out there will charge, London rates.
Yeah.
And not everyone can afford that.
Exactly. Well, that's good.
You put us on
I
the
don't know.
spot there.
I know. Well,
Hopefully
we never
cope
know.
well with that.
You did very well. You did very well.
Really difficult, isn't it?
10 out of 10. Just because we're on Olympics mode.
Yes.
Well,
we ran
That was
into
a
the office,
difficult
by the way, for anyone that needed context there.
it's funny because, in Unividual, they come on every month, and then they usually come 12:45, you know, and I'm like, it's 12:56. Where are they? And then I said, I'm just gonna wander down to the parking lot to see what they are, and they're just sprinting down the office, you know, and just like, okay, we're experienced guests,
In
aren't
our
we?
defense, someone was blocking us in at work, and they said they're going to be 10 minutes, and it wasn't quite 10 minutes, was it? So
I'd just say I didn't put any stops on for the music. We'll be back with more business exit tips after this.
This is Radio Bath.
Don't be a slave to love, and don't be a slave to your business. That's the other key message in this Brave Business Conversation show.
I like it. I like that a lot.
Well, as not to be a slave to your business, there's this thing called shareholder agreements, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of, if you don't do it right, you become a slave to your business.
Yeah,
Because you can't
true,
get out.
definitely, yeah.
And in the first hour, I did talk about, I wrapped up with this whole thing about make sure in your shareholder agreements there are exit clause and contingency clauses and everything. What are your tips around that?
So I think the first and foremost is set the context for it. So in the UK at the moment, there's about 5.7 million sort of private sector businesses in the UK alone. And sort of just under 50% of those have no specific arrangements or agreements in place to sort of cover the loss of a shareholder or a key person in that business. And I think knowing that, we've got to understand that every business is therefore going to be different. The owners of those businesses are going to have different objectives, have different personal lives. But I think at the core of it, we've got to understand, okay, and it's that worst case planning, if a business owner has multiple partners in the business, and each of those partners then has a wider family beyond that, you would typically expect their wills to dictate that if something happens to one of them, short term, unexpectedly, or as expected, that those shares of those businesses would then pass either to their spouse or to their family members. Now, what you've got to then consider is, okay, how would each of those other business owners that are still there, the business is still running, how do they then react to that environment? Because whether it's 5% or whether it's 50 or 60%, that can have a huge impact on how the business is run moving forward. You know, how are those dividends distributed? How are the shares then reallocated? All those other bits and pieces.
Well, essentially, the person inheriting them will then become the person that has those shares and should be then working in the business.
And we were talking, weren't we, off air about, you know, do people have the right characteristics to run a business? And do they want to? You know, just because someone's a shareholder doesn't actually mean they necessarily want to. So there are specific agreements in place, and that's where the shareholder agreement becomes really, really important. In the same way that the Articles of Association are absolutely crucial. You know, it's not necessarily the right thing to hook an off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all approach to these things. So get the right help, get the right legal help, and understand what would happen if certain people in the business were no longer around.
Yeah, and that might even be the case that if you're thinking, okay, in 5, 10, 15 years, I might want to do a management buyout, you might then start thinking, wouldn't it be good to actually give some of the people that might potentially buy me out of the business some shares now? Mm-hmm. What happens if they are employees and they leave? Right. Is there an ability to get those shares back or buy them back or have them back? So there's a lot of different questions that you kind of need to know to ask yourself, and you need someone to ask you those questions so you can think of the answers. And becoming a shareholder is a big thing, really big thing.
Yes.
It's high risk. You don't know how that person's going to be
For both parties.
So it's making sure that you thought of every avenue and every scenario that could happen, and that's where having experience with this helps. Likewise, there are really good things that we can put in place that people wouldn't know about. So, for example, if a shareholder was to pass away, you could put a policy in place where the person inheriting through their will would actually get a payout of the value of what the shares were, and the shares could go back to the business for free, which would mean the other additional shareholders would have that. So there's lots of things we can put in place, and it's just about getting professional help and not being nervous about getting help. Like, we do all the legwork for you, we do all the admin, all the paperwork, and it's not as scary as what people perhaps think
it's not
it
as
is.
expensive as people think.
No.
I think
Yeah,
that's the key
no,
thing.
and it's scarier when you realize that you don't have that in place. Time's
Yeah.
ticking, and you know, when partners start going the different ways, it is a scarier time to have that conversation
Yeah.
because everybody's desperate, or at least if you're desperate, that's really not a good time to negotiate. But yeah, so I love this whole business exit guide. How can they get access to that, and how can they contact you?
Well, if they go onto unividual.co.uk, on our homepage at the top, it says Finance Guides. If you just click that, that will give you access to all of our guides that are free. We provide a lot of upfront free information, and no, we don't ask for an email address to download something. The reason it is free is because if people can educate themselves and they want to do it themselves, at least they've got some knowledge and guidance to do that. But if they feel a bit worried about what they're doing and they want some professional help and they want to outsource that because they haven't got the time to do it themselves, then they can come to us for more help.
Fantastic. And again, that's Unividual. Everyone is an individual and every need is unique. So that's UNI Visual. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank
We'll
you.
be back
Cynthia.
next month again,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
we'll hear about more topics that'll help you in your business and in your personal finance.